The monitors had already gone silent. Top doctors stood back, their verdict final. Al-Haji Musa Danjuma was gone. His wife signed the papers without tears. His son checked his phone, already thinking about power. No one noticed the poor cleaner standing in the corner. But Bilqisu Sani stepped forward anyway. No permission, no status, no voice. She gently poured warm water over the lifeless man's hair, her trembling hands moving with quiet care. Then a finger twitched, just once, and suddenly the dead man wasn't so dead after all. Before we continue, where are you watching from and what time is it there? If stories like this move you, don't forget to subscribe and join our journey. Lagos never truly slept. Even before the sun rose, the city was already awake, restless, breathing, alive with urgency. The distant hum of generators blended with the early calls to prayer, while Danfo buses roared through crowded streets, their conductors shouting destinations into the morning haze. Hawkers balanced trays of breadfruit and sachet water on their heads, weaving through traffic like they had done all their lives. In one part of the city, glass towers stretched into the sky, symbols of wealth, ambition, and power. In another, only a few kilometers away, narrow alleys twisted through crowded settlements, where tin roofs rattled under the wind, and the scent of survival lingered in the air. Between these two worlds, invisible yet sharply divided, lived people like Bilqisu Sani. She woke before dawn, as she always did. Her room was small, barely large enough for the thin mattress she shared with her mother, Hajia Zulaiha. The walls were cracked, stained by years of humidity and neglect. A single flickering bulb hung from the ceiling, casting weak light across the room. Bilqisu sat up slowly, careful not to wake her mother, but Hajia Zulaiha was already awake. Bilqisu. Her mother's voice was soft, fragile. Bilqisu turned immediately. "Mama, you should rest." Zulaiha tried to smile, but the effort showed. Illness had taken weight from her body and strength from her voice. "You leave too early every day," she murmured. "Even the sun waits longer than you." Bilqisu forced a small laugh, though her chest tightened. "If I wait like the sun, Mama, we won't eat." There was no bitterness in her tone, only truth. She reached for a small plastic bowl, poured some water into it, and gently helped her mother sit up. Every movement was careful, practiced. This was not new, this was their life. As she wiped her mother's face with a clean cloth, her mind was already racing through the day ahead: transport fare, hospital shifts, the cost of medication she could barely afford. "Did you eat last night?" Zulaiha asked suddenly. Bilqisu hesitated. That silence was enough. Zulaiha closed her eyes, pain not just from sickness, but from knowing. "You must stop doing this. You cannot keep giving everything to me." Bilqisu shook her head gently. "There is nothing to give if I don't give it to you." The words were simple, but they carried a weight that hung in the air long after she said them. Outside, the sky began to lighten. It was time. Bilqisu dressed quickly in her faded uniform, a pale blue outfit that had long lost its original color. The fabric was worn thin at the edges, but she kept it clean, pressed as neatly as she could. It was the only thing that made her feel respectable. Before leaving, she knelt beside her mother. "I will come back early today," she whispered. Zulaiha nodded, though both of them knew that promise depended on things Bilqisu could not control. As Bilqisu stepped out into the narrow alley, the city swallowed her almost instantly. The journey to the hospital was long. She squeezed into a crowded bus, standing for most of the ride, her hand gripping the metal rail above her head. Around her, conversations rose and fell, arguments about money, laughter that tried to hide exhaustion, prayers whispered under breath. Bilqisu said nothing. She simply watched the city rush by, watched people fight, survive, endure. And quietly she carried her own battle within her. By the time she arrived at Royal Crest Hospital, the sun was fully up, casting golden light across the polished glass exterior. The building stood tall, clean, almost untouched by the chaos of the streets outside. Inside, everything was different. Cool air, shiny floors, soft voices, and rules. Many rules. Bilqisu lowered her gaze slightly as she entered, instinctively making herself smaller. People like her were not meant to be seen here, only to clean, to disappear, to exist without presence. Late again, the voice came sharp and sudden. Bilqisu turned quickly. It was Nurse Bimpe Adebayo, her supervisor for the cleaning staff. "I'm sorry, Ma," Bilqisu said, lowering her head. "The bus." There is always a story, Bimpe cut in, adjusting her clipboard without looking at her. "Just make sure your work speaks louder than your excuses." "Yes, Ma." Bilqisu moved quickly after that, grabbing her cleaning supplies and heading toward her assigned floors. She worked quietly, efficiently, mopping floors, wiping surfaces, emptying bins, invisible. That was how she had learned to survive. But even in her silence, she noticed things. She noticed how some patients were treated with urgency, surrounded by doctors, attended to immediately, and others left waiting, left forgotten, left unseen. It wasn't fair, but fairness had never been part of her world. By midday, the hospital had grown busier. Footsteps echoed through the corridors. Voices carried tension, urgency, fear. Something was happening. Bilqisu felt it before she understood it. Then she heard a name. At first just a whisper, then louder. Danjuma. CEO. Critical. She paused, her hand still gripping the mop handle. Even she knew that name. Alhaji Musa Danjuma. Everyone did. A man whose wealth shaped industries. A man whose decisions affected thousands of lives. A man so powerful people spoke his name with a mix of respect and fear. What was he doing here? Curiosity stirred in her chest, but she pushed it down. It wasn't her place. Still, something in the air felt heavy, different. As she continued working, she noticed increased security near one of the upper floors. Men in suits stood outside restricted areas, their eyes scanning everyone who passed. Bilqisu kept her head down, but as she moved closer, the tension became undeniable. Doctors rushed in and out of a private ICU wing. Voices were low, urgent, and then a stretcher passed, fast, covered, surrounded. Bilqisu froze for just a second as it rushed by her. She didn't see the face, but she didn't need to. The silence around that moment said everything. Something was very wrong. She swallowed, forcing herself to move again, but her heart beat faster now because, without knowing why, without understanding how, she felt it. That strange, quiet pull, as if something had shifted, as if the path of her life, so small, so unnoticed, was slowly, quietly being drawn towards something much bigger, something she could not yet see, something she could not yet understand. And somewhere beyond the doors, she was not allowed to enter. A powerful man was fighting a battle no one could see, while the only person who might truly notice was the one no one ever looked at. The private ICU wing at Royal Crest Hospital had never been this guarded. Security men in dark suits stood at every entrance, their expressions firm, their eyes trained to filter who belonged and who did not. Even senior nurses felt the pressure. Conversations were quieter here, footsteps more careful, as if the entire floor understood that something powerful, something fragile, was at stake. Inside the main ICU room, machines hummed in controlled rhythm. At the center of it all lay Alhaji Musa Danjuma. Once he had filled boardrooms with his presence. His voice alone could shift markets, silence opposition, command loyalty. Now he lay still, surrounded not by executives or investors, but by wires, tubes, and the cold logic of medical certainty. A ventilator breathed for him. Monitors displayed steady lines that meant life but not awareness. To the doctors, He was no longer a man. He was a condition, a diagnosis, a conclusion already written. Standing near the glass wall that separated the ICU from the observation area was Hoa Danjuma, his wife. Elegant, composed, untouched. She wore a long flowing gown of deep emerald, her headscarf perfectly arranged. Her face carried no visible grief, only a stillness that was difficult to read. If pain existed in her, it did not show. Behind her stood their son Kabir Danjuma, tall, sharp, controlled. But his stillness was different. His eyes moved, calculating, watching everything, absorbing every word, every glance, every moment that could be turned into opportunity. Dr. Hawa said quietly, her voice calm but firm, "We need clarity." The senior consultant, Professor Ibrahim Bello, adjusted his glasses before responding. His tone was professional, measured. "We have conducted multiple neurological assessments," he said. "There is no brain activity consistent with recovery. All indicators confirm brain death." Kabir stepped forward slightly. "You're saying there is absolutely no chance?" The professor met his gaze. "In cases like this, recovery is not medically expected, not expected." The phrase lingered. Kabir nodded slowly, but inside his thoughts were moving faster than anyone could see. Not expected meant not impossible. But it also meant something else. Delay, and delay was dangerous. For him. He glanced toward his father's motionless body, then back to the doctor. "How long can the machine sustain him?" Kabir asked. "A considerable time," the doctor replied. "But ethically and medically, once brain death is confirmed, continuation becomes a matter of family decision." Family decision. That was all Kabir needed to hear. Hawa folded her hands calmly. "We will discuss as a family." But her tone carried something final, something already decided. Outside the ICU, the atmosphere shifted as the news quietly spread among staff. No official announcement had been made, but whispers traveled faster than any formal statement. "Adu no Danjuma." They said brain dead. "Is it true?" Bilqisu heard fragments as she moved through the corridor, her mop gliding across the polished floor. She kept her head down, but she was listening, always listening. She had learned that in places like this, truth lived between whispers, not in official words. As she approached the restricted wing again, she noticed something different. More tension, more urgency, and something else. Fear, not loud, not visible, but present. She slowed slightly as she worked her eyes, briefly lifting toward the glass panel that offered a distant view into the ICU area. Just for a second. That was all it took. She saw him, barely. A figure lying still, surrounded by machines. Powerful ones, now silent. Something in her chest tightened, but she didn't know why. She quickly lowered her gaze again. Not her place. Never her place. Hours passed. Inside a private consultation room, the Danjuma family sat across from Professor Bello and two other specialists. Documents lay on the table, consent forms, medical summaries, legal confirmations. All findings have been independently verified, one of the doctors explained. "We are prepared to proceed once you give authorization." Kabir leaned back, slightly tapping his fingers against the armrest. Timing. Everything was about timing. He thought of the company, the board, the investors, the fragile balance that depended on his father's leadership. If word spread that Musa Danjuma was gone, power would shift quickly, and not always in his favor. He needed control, immediate control. "We should proceed," Kabir said, his voice steady. "There's no point prolonging this." Hawa turned her head slightly toward him, not surprised, but thoughtful. "You are certain?" she asked. Kabir met her eyes. "Mother, he's already gone." The room fell silent for a moment. Hawa looked down at the documents, then slowly she reached for a pen. Back in the corridor, Bilqisu finished cleaning the last section of the floor. Her body was tired, but her mind wasn't at rest. Something kept pulling her attention back toward that ICU wing, something she couldn't explain. As she moved to empty a bin near the restricted area, she noticed the door to a side hallway slightly open. Inside, she could hear voices, low, serious. She didn't mean to listen, but she couldn't walk away. "We will schedule the withdrawal tomorrow morning," a voice said. "Everything must remain confidential until then." Bilqisu froze. Withdrawal. Her grip tightened slightly on the bin. "Family has agreed," another voice added. "That's the final decision." Final. The word echoed in her mind. Her heart began to beat faster. She didn't know why. She didn't understand why it mattered to her, but it did, more than it should. She stepped back quietly, moving away before anyone noticed her presence. But the words followed her, stayed with her, refused to leave. Later that evening, as the hospital lights dimmed slightly and the pace slowed, Bilqisu found herself assigned once again to the upper floors. Closer. Too close. As she approached the ICU wing, she noticed fewer people now. The urgency of the day had settled into a heavy, waiting silence. Inside the room, through the glass, Musa Danjuma lay exactly as before, unmoving, unaware, unseen. Bilqisu stopped, just for a moment. Her breath slowed, her eyes lingered, and then she frowned. It was small, so small she almost doubted herself, but something didn't feel right. She leaned slightly, her gaze sharpening. The monitor lines were steady, the machines were functioning. Everything looked normal, too normal. Her heart began to pound, because somewhere deep inside her memory a forgotten moment stirred. A hospital, a bed, a voice saying the same words. "Nothing more we can do." Her father, declared gone, before he truly was. Bilqisu swallowed hard, stepping back quickly. "No," she whispered to herself. It couldn't be the same. It couldn't. But the feeling wouldn't leave, that quiet, unsettling doubt, as if something had been missed, as if something still remained. And for the first time, Bilqisu Sani, the invisible cleaner no one listened to, felt the weight of a question no one else was asking. What if he wasn't truly gone? Night settled over Royal Crest Hospital with a deceptive calm. From the outside, the building looked peaceful, its glass facade reflecting the dim city lights, its corridors glowing softly under controlled illumination. But inside, beneath that quiet surface, decisions were being made that would not be undone. On the private ICU floor, everything felt suspended. Not alive, not dead, just waiting. Inside the main room, Alhaji Musa Danjuma lay exactly as he had for hours, motionless, surrounded by the steady rhythm of machines that now spoke more loudly than any human voice. A ventilator rose and fell. Monitors blinked, numbers changed. But the man at the center of it all remained still. To the doctors, that stillness meant certainty. To the family, it meant closure. But to someone else, it meant doubt. Earlier that evening, the final confirmation had been given. Morning. That was when they would disconnect the machines. No announcements, no public statements. Everything handled quietly, controlled, dignified, strategic. Especially for someone like Musa Danjuma. In a private waiting lounge nearby, Kabir Danjuma stood by the window phone pressed to his ear. "Yes," he said in a low voice, "prepare the board. We'll need an emergency session within 48 hours. He paused, listening. "No delays. Once it's confirmed, we move immediately." His tone was calm, but beneath it was urgency and something colder, control. Behind him, seated on a leather couch, Hawa Danjuma watched him in silence. When he ended the call, she spoke. "You're moving very fast." Kabir turned slightly. "We don't have the luxury of waiting." He is still your father, Hawa said. Kabir's jaw tightened. He was my father, he corrected quietly. Now he is a situation. The words hung in the air. Heavy. Final. Hawa studied him for a moment. There was no shock in her eyes. No anger. Only a quiet recognition of who her son had become. Then she looked away. Perhaps she had always known. Down the corridor, past the polished floors and silent walls, Bilqisu Sani moved with her cleaning cart. Her steps were slower tonight, more deliberate. Her mind was not focused on her work. It was trapped somewhere else. That word again, withdrawal. Her grip tightened around the handle of the mop. She tried to shake it off, tried to tell herself it was none of her business, that she was just a cleaner, that people like her did not question doctors, did not interfere, did not matter. But the memory would not let her go. Her father lying still, neighbors whispering, a doctor shaking his head, nothing more we can do. And then the faint movement no one believed, except her. She stopped walking. Her breath caught slightly in her throat. No, she whispered. But the feeling grew stronger. That same unease, that same quiet resistance inside her chest. As if something was wrong, not visibly, not provably, but deeply. She looked toward the ICU wing again. The doors stood closed, guarded, untouchable, yet somehow calling her. Inside the ICU, the night shift had taken over. Fewer staff, less movement, more silence. Machines continued their steady work, indifferent to time, to emotion, to consequence. A young nurse adjusted a drip line before glancing at the chart. Everything was as expected, stable, unchanging. She sighed quietly, making a note before stepping out. For them it was routine, another case, another ending. But for Bilqisu, nothing felt routine anymore. She finished one section, then another. Her body moved automatically, but her thoughts remained fixed on one place. That room, that man, that question. Finally, she found herself standing just outside the restricted hallway again. Her heart pounded louder now. She knew she shouldn't be there. She knew the consequences. People like her did not cross lines, not here, not in places ruled by hierarchy and silence. But something inside her refused to stay quiet. A small voice, fragile, but persistent. What if they are wrong? She swallowed hard. Her hands trembled slightly. No, she whispered again. But this time it sounded weaker, because doubt had already taken root. Footsteps approached. Bilqisu quickly lowered her head and resumed cleaning, pretending to focus on the floor. A senior nurse walked past without even glancing at her, invisible, as always. But tonight, invisibility felt different. Tonight it felt like an opportunity. No one was watching her. No one was thinking about her. No one was expecting anything from her, which meant no one would stop her. The realization sent a chill through her body. She stood still for a moment. Then slowly, she looked up toward the ICU doors, closed, but not unreachable. Minutes passed, or maybe longer. Time felt strange now, stretched, uncertain. Bilqisu moved closer, step by step, careful, quiet. Her cleaning cart remained behind, abandoned. For the first time since she started this job, she wasn't thinking about rules. She wasn't thinking about consequences. She was thinking about one thing, a man who might still be alive. She reached the door. Her hand hovered just inches away. Her breath shallow, her pulse racing. This is not your place. Her mind warned. You will lose everything. Her fingers trembled. But then, another voice, quieter, stronger. What if you are the only one who sees it? Her eyes filled slightly, not with fear, but with something deeper, something she hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose. She closed her eyes for a brief second. Then she pushed the door open. Inside the ICU room was colder, quieter, almost unreal. The machines continued their steady rhythm, filling the silence with mechanical life. Bilqisu stepped in slowly, her feet barely making a sound. She looked around. No one. No doctors, no nurses, just him, Alhaji Musa Danjuma. For a moment she stood frozen. The reality of what she had done hit her all at once. She had crossed a line she could not uncross, but it was too late to turn back. She took a step closer, then another, her eyes fixed on his face, still, unmoving. But now that she was closer, something felt different, not visible, not obvious, but there. She reached out slowly, her hand hovering above his arm, hesitating, doubting, afraid. Then finally, her fingers touched his skin, warm, not cold, not lifeless, warm. Her breath caught sharply, her heart pounded harder. "No," she whispered again. But this time it wasn't denial, it was realization. Something was wrong, deeply wrong. And for the first time, Bilqisu Sani knew. This was no longer just a feeling. This was a truth waiting to be seen. The moment Bilqisu's fingers touched Alhaji Musa Danjuma's arm, something shifted inside her. It wasn't just the warmth of his skin. It was the memory that came rushing back, uninvited, unstoppable. Her father, lying on a narrow hospital bed in a clinic far less polished than Royal Crest. The smell of disinfectant barely covering the scent of neglect. A tired doctor standing at the foot of the bed, shaking his head. "There is nothing more we can do." She had been younger then, helpless, ignored. She remembered standing beside that bed, watching everyone walk away, while something inside her screamed that it wasn't over, that something still remained. But no one listened. No one looked twice. No one cared enough to question. And hours later, her father was truly gone. Not when they said he was, but when they left him. Bilqisu's chest tightened painfully as she stood beside Musa's bed now. The machines continued their steady rhythm as if unaware of the storm inside her. She looked at his face again, still, silent, but no longer convincing. Her fingers pressed slightly firmer against his arm, warm, alive, not responding but not gone. Her breathing became uneven. What if? She whispered, her voice trembling. The thought was dangerous. It challenged everything she had been taught to believe. Doctors were not wrong. Systems did not fail. People like her did not see what experts missed. And yet here she was, seeing something, feeling something, knowing something. She pulled her hand back, suddenly fear crashing in. What was she doing? If anyone saw her, if anyone knew, she would lose everything. Her job, her income, her ability to care for her mother, everything. She stepped back quickly, her eyes darting toward the door. Still empty, still quiet. The hospital moved on outside this room, unaware of the fragile moment unfolding inside it. Bilqisu turned to leave. Her heart was racing, her mind screaming at her to walk away. This was not her fight, not her responsibility, not her place. But just as she reached the door, she stopped. Her hand hovered over the handle, her body frozen between fear and something stronger, conscience. She closed her eyes tightly. "You cannot do this again," she whispered to herself. But the memory of her father wouldn't let her go. The silence, the abandonment, the regret that had followed her ever since. If she walked away now, if she ignored what she felt, would she live with that again? Would she carry that same guilt? Her shoulders trembled slightly. "No," she whispered again. But this time, the word was different. Not fear, decision. She slowly turned back. Her eyes moved once more to Musa's body. This time she didn't hesitate. She walked back to the bed, closer, steadier. Her fear hadn't disappeared, but something else had grown stronger than it. A quiet, stubborn courage. She didn't know what she was doing. She didn't know what would happen. But she knew one thing. She would not leave him like that, not without trying. Bilqisu looked around the room again, her mind searching for something, anything she could do. She wasn't a doctor. She didn't understand machines or medical charts. But she understood something else. Care, human touch, the small things that couldn't be measured by equipment. She remembered how she used to care for her father, how she would sit beside him, talk to him, touch his hair, massage his scalp when he couldn't speak. She didn't know if it had helped, but she knew he had felt it, known it. And in that moment, something inside her told her maybe that still mattered. Her eyes moved to Musa's head. His hair was dry, unkempt. No one had touched him with care. Not really, not like a human being, only as a patient, a case, a conclusion. Bilqisu swallowed hard. Her hands trembled again, but she didn't stop. She reached for a small basin nearby, filled it gently with warm water from the tap. The sound of running water felt louder than it should have in the quiet room. She froze for a second, listening. Nothing, no footsteps, no voices. She exhaled slowly, then turned back. Her movements were careful, delicate, almost reverent. She dipped the cloth into the warm water, wringing it gently before bringing it toward Musa's head. For a brief second, she hesitated again. "This is madness," her mind whispered. "You will be caught. You will be punished." But her hands didn't stop. The cloth touched his hair, soft, slow, intentional. She began to clean gently her fingers, moving in small circles just like she had done so many times before. "This is not a hospital," she murmured softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "This is a person." Her throat tightened as she spoke. She didn't know if he could hear her. She didn't know if it mattered. But she continued. "You are not gone," she whispered. "I don't believe it." Her fingers moved through his hair again, massaging gently, carefully. The room remained still. The machines unchanged. Nothing happened. And yet she didn't stop. Because this wasn't about proof anymore. It was about something deeper, something instinctive, something human. Tears gathered in her eyes, slipping down silently as she continued. "You have people who are waiting to leave you," she whispered. "But Her voice broke slightly. "I won't leave you like that." The words lingered in the air, soft, fragile, but filled with a strength she didn't know she had. Minutes passed, or maybe longer. Time no longer felt real. Bilqisu continued her quiet act of care, her hands steady despite the storm inside her. And still nothing. No movement, no response, just silence. Her shoulders began to sag slightly. Doubt crept back in. Maybe she was wrong. Maybe this was just grief speaking, memory, fear, hope, where there was none. Her hands slowed, then stopped. She closed her eyes briefly, her chest tightening again. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I thought. She couldn't finish the sentence, because she didn't know what she had thought, only that she had believed. And now that belief was fading. She placed the cloth gently back into the basin, her fingers trembling, her heart heavy. She turned slightly, preparing to leave. And then something changed. It was so small, it could have been missed. A shift, a flicker, a barely there movement. Bilqisu froze. Her breath stopped. Her eyes snapped back to Musa's hand. For a second she doubted herself. Her mind tried to explain it away. A reflex, a glitch, nothing real. But then she saw it again. A slight twitch, faint, uncertain, but undeniable. Her heart slammed against her chest. "No," she whispered. But this time, it wasn't fear. It was shock, hope, and something rising fast inside her, something that refused to be silenced anymore. Because what she had just seen was not death. It was life. Bilqisu didn't move, not at first. Her eyes were locked on Alhaji Musa Danjuma's hand, her entire body frozen, as if even breathing too loudly might erase what she had just seen. The room fell into a strange silence. No, not silence. The machines were still there, still humming, still blinking, but everything else seemed to disappear. Her thoughts, her fear, even time itself, all of it narrowed into one single point. That hand. "Move again," she whispered under her breath, barely aware she had spoken. Her heart pounded violently, each beat echoing in her ears. Nothing. The hand lay still again, the same as before, lifeless, or at least appearing that way. Doubt rushed back in like a cold wave. Did she imagine it? Was it just her mind desperate to be right? Her fingers trembled as she stepped closer again. "No," she murmured. "I saw it." She knew she saw it. But knowing wasn't enough. Not here. Not in a place where proof meant everything and people like her meant nothing. Her eyes darted toward the door again. Still empty. Still no one coming. A part of her screamed to run, to leave before she was caught, to pretend none of this ever happened. But another part, stronger now, refused. Because if she walked away now, that small movement might be the last chance he ever had. And she would have killed that chance, just like before, just like her father. Her chest tightened painfully. "No," she whispered again. This time it sounded like a promise. She leaned forward quickly, her hands hovering uncertainly, before gently gripping Musa's wrist. Warm, still warm. Her fingers pressed slightly, feeling for something, anything. She didn't know what exactly. A pulse, a reaction, a sign, but her hands weren't trained. Her knowledge wasn't medical. All she had was instinct. And instinct was telling her he wasn't gone. "Please," she whispered, her voice trembling now. "Please don't stop." Her words weren't logical. They weren't scientific. But they were real. And in that moment, real was all she had. She straightened suddenly, panic rising again. She needed someone, a doctor, a nurse, anyone. If they saw what she saw, if they believed her, everything could change. Without thinking further, she rushed to the door and pushed it open. The hallway outside was quiet, but not empty. A nurse passed by at the far end. "Ma Bilqisu," called out, her voice breaking slightly. "Please, please, come." The nurse turned, startled, her expression immediately shifting into irritation as she recognized who was calling her. "What are you doing in there?" she snapped, walking quickly toward her. "You're not allowed." He moved. Bilqisu interrupted desperately. "His hand, he moved. I saw it." The nurse stopped just outside the room, her face tightening. "What nonsense is this?" "It's not nonsense." Bilqisu insisted, her voice rising despite her fear. "Please, just check, please." The nurse's eyes hardened. "Do you know who that patient is?" she said sharply. "Do you understand the level of responsibility in that room?" Bilqisu nodded quickly. "Yes, I know, but then you should also know your place." The nurse cut in coldly. "You are cleaning staff, nothing more." The words hit like a slap. But Bilqisu didn't step back, not this time. "Please," she said again, softer now, but more urgent. "Just look." The nurse exhaled sharply, clearly annoyed, but something in Bilqisu's desperation made her hesitate. "Fine," she muttered. "One look, and then you get out." They stepped into the ICU together. Bilqisu's heart raced as she moved quickly toward the bed. There, his hand. He moved it, she said, pointing. The nurse walked over slowly, her movements. Calm, controlled, professional. She glanced at the monitors, checked the readings, then looked at Musa's hand. Still, unmoving. She waited a moment longer. Nothing. The nurse straightened, her expression unimpressed. "I see nothing." Bilqisu shook her head quickly. No, it happened. I swear it happened." The nurse gave her a look that was almost pitying, but mostly dismissive. Postmortem reflexes can occur, she said flatly. Muscle responses. It means nothing. It didn't look like that, Bilqisu insisted, her voice breaking. It was different. Enough, the nurse snapped. The word echoed sharply in the room. You are not trained. You are not qualified. And you are definitely not allowed to interfere in critical care. Bilqisu's hands clenched tightly at her sides. But what if there is no what if? The nurse interrupted firmly. The doctors have already made their assessment. Her tone softened slightly, but not with kindness. With people like you, imagination can be dangerous, she added. People like you. The word stung deeply. Bilqisu lowered her gaze, shame burning in her chest. For a moment she felt small again, invisible again, like she always had. The nurse walked toward the door, then paused. If I see you here again without permission, she said without turning, you will lose your job. Immediately. Then she left. The door closed, and silence returned. But this time it felt heavier, colder. Bilqisu stood there unmoving. Her chest rose and fell unevenly. Her eyes blurred with tears she refused to let fall. She had tried. She had spoken. And once again, no one believed her. Just like before. Her shoulders trembled slightly. Maybe they were right. Maybe she had imagined it. Maybe grief and memory had played tricks on her mind. Maybe she was wrong. The thought pressed down on her heavy and suffocating. Because if she was wrong, she had risked everything for nothing. Slowly she turned away from the bed. Her steps were heavier now, slower, defeated. She reached the door again, her hand lifting weakly toward the handle. This is not your fight, her mind whispered again. This is not your place. And this time, she almost believed it. Her fingers touched the handle. She began to push, and then a sound. Soft, barely audible, but unmistakable. A shift in the monitor. A change. Bilqisu froze. Her breath caught again. Slowly, very slowly, she turned her head. Her eyes moved back to the bed, to the monitors. The lines were no longer exactly the same, subtle, but different. Her heart began to race again, faster than before, because this time it wasn't just a feeling, it wasn't just a memory. It was something real, something visible, something that could not be explained away so easily. Her voice trembled as she stepped back toward the bed. No, she whispered, but her eyes were wide now, awake, certain, because deep down, Bilqisu Sani knew this was only the beginning. The monitor didn't make a dramatic sound, no alarm, no sudden spike that would send doctors rushing through the door, just a subtle shift, a rhythm that changed almost imperceptibly, like a whisper hidden inside noise. But Bilqisu Sani saw it, and this time she didn't doubt herself. Her eyes stayed locked on the screen, her breath shallow, her heart racing so fast it felt like it might break through her chest. That's not the same, she murmured. She didn't understand the numbers, didn't know what each line meant, but she knew one thing. It wasn't the same as before. Her gaze moved back to Alhaji Musa Danjuma. His face remained still, his body unmoving. But something had changed. Something small, something quiet, but real. And for the first time fear returned, but not the kind that made her want to run. This fear was different. It carried responsibility. Because if she was right, if what she was seeing meant what she thought it meant, then walking away now wouldn't just be cowardice, it would be betrayal. She swallowed hard. Her mind raced. The nurse didn't believe her. The doctors wouldn't listen. People like her didn't get second chances to speak in rooms like this. But time was slipping away. Morning was coming. And with it, the machines would be turned off. Her chest tightened painfully at the thought. No, she whispered again. Not like this. Not again. Elsewhere in the hospital, decisions were already moving forward. Inside a private office, Kabir Danjuma, sat across from a legal advisor, his posture relaxed, but his eyes sharp. All documents are prepared, the advisor said, sliding a folder across the table. Once the official time of death is confirmed, the transition process can begin immediately. Kabir nodded slowly, flipping through the papers. Board approval. Already in motion, the advisor replied, "There may be resistance from some members, but with your position as next of kin, it won't matter," Kabir finished calmly, because he already knew. Power didn't wait. It didn't hesitate. It moved, and he intended to move with it. He closed the folder and leaned back slightly, exhaling. For a brief moment, silence filled the room. Then, "Do you feel nothing?" The question came unexpectedly. Kabir looked up. His mother, Hawa Danjuma, stood near the doorway. He hadn't heard her enter. Her eyes rested on him, not accusing, not emotional, just searching. Kabir held her gaze for a moment, then shrugged lightly. "What is there to feel?" he said. "He built everything you have," Hawa replied. Kabir's lips tightened slightly. "And he kept everything from me," he countered. "Control, trust, respect." The words carried something deeper now, something personal. "He never prepared me to lead," Kabir continued. "He only reminded me I wasn't him." Hawa said nothing, because she knew that was true. And now Kabir added quietly, "I don't need his permission anymore." The room fell silent again, heavy, unresolved. Hawa studied her son for a long moment. Then she turned and walked away without another word, because sometimes silence said more than anything else. Back in the ICU, Bilqisu stood alone once more. But this time she wasn't hesitating. She wasn't questioning. She was thinking fast, carefully, desperately. If they wouldn't listen to her words, she needed something they couldn't ignore. Proof. But how her eyes moved around the room again. Machines, monitors, charts. Everything here belonged to people who understood it. Not her. Her hands clenched slightly. "I don't know how to show this," she whispered. Her voice sounded small in the quiet room. But inside her, something was growing. Determination. Because she wasn't wrong. She couldn't be. Not this time. Her gaze fell again on Musa's body. Still, but no longer lifeless. She stepped closer again, her movements more confident now. "If you can hear me," she whispered softly, her voice trembling, "I need you to show them." The words felt impossible, unreal, but she meant them, because she didn't have anything else. Her hand reached out again, resting gently on his arm. Warm, always warm. That alone still didn't make sense. She leaned slightly closer, her voice barely audible now. "They're going to turn everything off," she said. "They think you're gone." Her throat tightened. "But I don't." Silence. Stillness. The machines continued their quiet work. Nothing changed. Her shoulders dropped slightly. Hope flickered, then weakened. Maybe this wasn't enough. Maybe she wasn't enough. She pulled her hand back slowly, her fingers trembling again. "I'm trying," she whispered. "I really am." Her voice broke this time, because she didn't know what else to do. A sudden noise in the hallway made her freeze. Footsteps, approaching, fast. Her heart jumped into her throat. She turned quickly toward the door. Someone was coming. Panic surged through her body. If she was caught here again, it would be over. Everything. Her job, her only source of income, her mother's treatment. All gone. She looked back at Musa for just a second, torn, desperate. Then she stepped away quickly, grabbing the basin and cloth, trying to make it look like she was doing her assigned work. The door opened. A doctor entered, tall, focused, unfamiliar. Bilqisu lowered her head immediately. I was just cleaning," she began quickly. But the doctor didn't respond. Instead, he walked straight to the monitors. His eyes narrowed slightly. Something had caught his attention. Bilqisu felt her breath stop. He leaned closer, studying the screen, the lines, the rhythm. Then he frowned. "That's strange," he murmured. The words were quiet, but to Bilqisu they sounded louder than anything she had ever heard. Her heart pounded wildly again, because finally someone else saw it. The doctor pressed a button reviewing previous readings, comparing, analyzing. His expression shifted, not fully alarmed, but no longer certain. Bilqisu couldn't hold back anymore. "Sir," she said softly. The doctor turned, noticing her properly for the first time. His eyes scanned her quickly, confused. "Why are you in here?" he asked. Bilqisu swallowed hard. Fear surged again, but this time she didn't step back. "Sir," she said again, her voice trembling but firm. He moved. The words hung in the air. Dangerous, unbelievable, but real. The doctor stared at her for a moment, then glanced back at the monitor, then at Musa, then back at her. Suspicion, doubt, but also something else, a question. And in that moment, for the first time, Bilqisu Sani was no longer completely invisible. The doctor didn't respond immediately. He simply looked at Bilqisu Sani, really looked at her this time, not as background, not as staff beneath notice, but as a person who had just said something that should not have been possible. He moved. He repeated slowly. Bilqisu nodded, her throat tight. "Yes, sir, I saw it." His hand and the monitor, it changed. The doctor turned back toward the bed. His name was Dr. Kelechi Okoye, one of the younger physicians on rotation, not yet hardened by years of unquestioned authority. He had learned to trust data, but he had also learned sometimes painfully that data could be incomplete. Still, what she was suggesting, it challenged everything. He stepped closer to the monitor again, reviewing the readings more carefully this time. The baseline, the fluctuations, the subtle inconsistencies. At first glance, everything aligned with a patient already declared brain dead. But when he looked deeper, really looked, something didn't sit right. There were micro variations, tiny irregular changes in rhythm that didn't match complete neurological silence. They were easy to ignore, easy to dismiss, but they were there. Kelechi frowned. "That shouldn't be happening," he murmured. Bilqisu felt her chest tighten with a fragile surge of hope. "You see it?" she asked softly. He didn't answer her question directly. Instead, he reached for Musa's chart, flipping through the pages quickly. Scans, reports, confirmations signed by senior consultants. Everything was thorough. Everything was conclusive. Everything said the same thing. No brain activity, no recovery, final. Kelechi exhaled slowly. "This doesn't make sense," he said under his breath. Bilqisu stepped slightly closer, her fear momentarily forgotten. "Sir, please," she said, "check him again." Kelechi glanced at her. There was something in her eyes, not arrogance, not imagination, conviction, and desperation. He hesitated, because if she was wrong, he would be questioning a team of the most respected specialists in the hospital. If she was right, everything they had done, everything they had concluded, would be thrown into doubt. His jaw tightened. Medicine was built on certainty, but truth was sometimes found in uncertainty. He turned back to the bed. "All right," he said quietly. Bilqisu's breath caught. He reached forward, checking Musa's pupils. No reaction. He pressed lightly along the limbs. No voluntary movement. He listened carefully to the ventilator rhythm. Stable. Everything still pointed to the same conclusion. But then he paused, his hand resting near Musa's wrist. He waited, watched, listened. Seconds passed. Then a faint shift, so small it could be dismissed. But this time, he didn't dismiss it. His eyes narrowed. "That," he murmured. Bilqisu leaned forward slightly. "You saw it?" Kelechi didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped back, his mind racing now. This wasn't supposed to happen. Not after confirmed brain death, not after multiple tests, unless something had been missed, or misinterpreted, or worse, ignored. His gaze hardened slightly. He turned toward the door. "We need to reevaluate," he said. Bilqisu felt relief rush through her, but it was short-lived, because the moment the door opened, everything changed. Two senior staff members stood outside, including Professor Ibrahim Bello, the same man who had led the original diagnosis. His presence filled the space immediately. Authority, experience, finality, Kelechi. He said, his tone calm but firm. "What is going on?" Kelechi straightened slightly. "Sir, I think we need to review the case again." A brief silence followed. Then Review Professor Bello repeated. "Yes, sir," Kelechi said. "There are inconsistencies in the monitor readings and possible motor response." The older doctor's expression did not change, but something in his eyes sharpened. "Are you questioning the diagnosis?" he asked. The question wasn't loud, but it carried weight, pressure. Kelechi hesitated just for a second. "Then I'm questioning the certainty," he replied carefully. That was enough. Professor Bello stepped into the room, his presence commanding immediate attention. He glanced briefly at Bilqisu, dismissed her instantly, then moved to the monitors. He reviewed the data, quickly, confidently. Then he looked at Musa, unmoving, silent, exactly as before. "There is nothing new here," he said flatly. Kelechi frowned slightly. "Sir, with respect, there are micro-variations that don't align with complete brain death." "Micro-variations can be machine artifacts," Bello replied without hesitation. "And the movement Kelechi pressed," Reflex Bello said immediately. Final, unchallenged. Bilqisu felt her chest tighten again. No, they were doing it again, ignoring, dismissing, ending something that wasn't finished. She stepped forward slightly before she could stop herself. It wasn't just reflex, she said. The room went still. Every eye turned to her. Professor Bello's gaze settled on her slowly, cold, measured. "And who are you?" he asked. Bilqisu swallowed hard. I work here, cleaning staff." "Then you should focus on your duties," he said calmly, "and leave medical conclusions to those qualified." The words were polite, but dismissive, final. Bilqisu's hands trembled, but she didn't step back, not this time. "I saw it," she said again, her voice shaking but stronger now, twice. Silence, heavy, uncomfortable. Kelechi glanced at her briefly, then back at Bello. Something in him resisted, but the hierarchy was clear, and the consequences real. Professor Bello exhaled slowly, clearly, losing patience. "This case has been thoroughly evaluated," he said. "We are not reopening it based on speculation." Then he turned to Kelechi. "Prepare for withdrawal in the morning." The words landed like a verdict. Final, irreversible. Bilqisu felt something inside her break, not loudly, not visibly, but deeply, because she had done everything she could, spoken, shown, proven at least as much as she could, and still it wasn't enough. Kelechi stood still, his jaw tight. He didn't agree, that much was clear, but he didn't challenge further, not openly, not here, because some battles couldn't be fought directly, not without losing everything. Professor Bello turned and walked out. The others followed. The room fell silent again. But this silence was different, heavier, more dangerous, because now time was no longer uncertain. It was counting down. Bilqisu stood there, her body trembling slightly. "They're going to turn it off," she whispered. Kelechi didn't respond immediately. He stared at the monitor again, at the small inconsistencies no one else wanted to see, then at Musa. Still, but not empty, not completely. His jaw tightened. "They shouldn't," he said quietly. Bilqisu looked at him quickly. Hope flickering again. "But they will," he added. And just like that, hope faltered. The reality settled in. Morning was coming. And with it, an ending that might not be real. Bilqisu's hands clenched at her sides. Tears blurred her vision, but she refused to let them fall, because something inside her, something stubborn, unbreakable, was still fighting, still refusing to accept what everyone else had already decided. And somewhere deep down, she knew this story wasn't over yet. Night deepened over Lagos, but inside Royal Crest Hospital time no longer followed its usual rhythm. It slowed, stretched, tightened around a single fragile moment that refused to disappear. Inside the ICU, the machines continued their quiet mechanical breathing for Alhaji Musa Danjuma. To everyone else it was routine, predictable, controlled, but to Bilqisu Sani every second felt like a countdown. Morning was coming, and with it, the end. Unless something changed. Unless he changed. She stood near the foot of the bed now, her hands clasped tightly together, her mind racing through everything that had just happened. She had spoken. She had shown them. Even a doctor had seen something. And still they chose certainty over doubt, authority over possibility, power over truth. Her chest rose and fell unevenly. "They won't listen," she whispered. The words tasted bitter because they were true. And truth, she had learned, didn't always matter, not when it came from someone like her. She turned slowly, her eyes falling once more on Musa's face, still, silent, but no longer empty. She stepped closer again, carefully, as if approaching something sacred. "You're still there?" she murmured. Not a question, a statement, a belief. And for the first time she allowed herself to feel it fully. Not just doubt, not just hope, but conviction. He wasn't gone, and if no one else would fight for that truth, then she would. Outside the ICU, the hospital had grown quieter. Night staff moved in soft patterns, their voices low, their footsteps careful. But beneath that calm surface, something heavier lingered. Decisions had been made. Orders had been given. And in the private wing, preparations were already underway for what would happen at dawn. In a dimly lit office, Kabir Danjuma sat alone. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioning. He stared at his phone screen, unread messages piling up, board members, investors, legal teams, all waiting, all watching, all ready. His fingers hovered over the screen for a moment. Then he locked it, set it aside, and leaned back. For the first time that night, his expression shifted slightly, not into grief, not into regret, but into something quieter, something more complicated. He exhaled slowly, his eyes drifting toward the dark window. "Why did you never trust me?" he murmured. The question was soft, barely audible, but real, because beneath his control, beneath his ambition, there was something unresolved, something unfinished between father and son. And now there would be no chance to fix it. He closed his eyes briefly, then opened them again. The moment passed. The control returned. And just like that, the man he had been disappeared. Because in Kabir's world, weakness had no place. Back in the ICU, Bilqisu had stopped thinking about consequences. Fear was still there, but it no longer ruled her, because something stronger had taken its place: purpose. She moved toward the sink again, filling the basin with warm water. Her hands were steadier now, not because she was calm, but because she had chosen to act, chosen to believe, chosen to stay. She carried the basin back to the bedside, set it down gently, then looked at Musa again. "I'm not done," she whispered. Her voice was soft, but certain. She dipped the cloth into the water once more, wringing it slowly. Then she began again. This time her movements were different, not hesitant, not unsure, intentional. Her fingers moved through his hair with care, massaging gently, rhythmically, just as she had done before. But now she spoke more, not because she expected an answer, but because silence felt wrong. "You don't know me," she said quietly. "I'm just someone who cleans your floors." A faint, sad smile touched her lips. "But I think you know what it feels like to be surrounded by people and still be alone." Her fingers paused briefly, then continued. "They think you're gone," she added, "but I don't believe them." Her voice softened further. "Not yet." Tears gathered in her eyes again, but she didn't stop. "I lost someone like this before," she whispered. "They said the same things, used the same words." Her throat tightened, and I listened. The confession hung in the air, heavy, painful. "I won't do that again," she said. Her hands pressed slightly firmer now, her movements more urgent. "So if you can hear me, if you're still there." Her voice broke slightly. "Please." The word was barely a sound, but it carried everything: her fear, her hope, her refusal to give up. The room remained still. The machines continued their steady rhythm. Nothing changed. For a moment, doubt returned. Her hands slowed. Her breath faltered. Maybe this was all in her head. Maybe she was fighting something that wasn't there. Maybe she had already lost. Her shoulders dropped slightly. The weight of everything pressed down on her again. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I thought she couldn't finish because she didn't know what she had thought anymore. Hope, possibility, a miracle. It all felt foolish now, too small, too impossible. Her hand slipped away from his hair, fell to her sides. Her eyes closed briefly, and for the first time that night she felt the edge of surrender. Then it happened. Not loud, not dramatic, but undeniable. A twitch, stronger this time, clearer. His fingers moved. Bilqisu's eyes snapped open. Her breath caught violently in her throat. "No," she whispered. But she was already stepping closer, already searching, already knowing. His hand moved again, not just a reflex, not random, controlled, faint but real. Her heart exploded into motion. "He's alive," she breathed. The words trembled out of her. Unbelievable, impossible, true. She reached for his hand, gripping it gently. "Sir, can you hear me?" she asked, her voice shaking. Silence. Then a flicker. His eyelids shifted, barely, but enough. Enough to shatter everything they had believed. Bilqisu gasped, tears spilling freely now. "No, no, this is real," she whispered. "This is real." Her entire body trembled with the weight of it, because this was not doubt anymore. This was not instinct. This was not memory. This was proof, living, breathing, undeniable proof. She turned toward the door, panic and urgency surging at once. "They have to see this," she said. "They have to know." But as she reached for the handle, she froze, because suddenly she understood. If they saw this now, everything would change. Not just for him, but for everyone. For the family, for the power, for the truth they had already decided to bury. Her grip tightened on the door. Her heart pounded wildly. Because for the first time, Bilqisu Sani realized saving him might not be the hardest part. Bilqisu's hand stayed on the door handle, but she didn't open it. Not yet. Her chest rose and fell in quick, uneven breaths as she turned back toward the bed. Alhaji Musa Danjuma's fingers were still. His eyelids no longer moved. The monitors returned to their familiar, steady rhythm, calm, controlled, almost indifferent. For a split second, doubt struck her again. Had she imagined it? No. No, she hadn't. She stepped back to his side quickly, her eyes scanning his face, his hands, the machines. Please, she whispered, her voice trembling. Do it again. Silence answered her, the same silence that had deceived everyone else. But not her, not anymore. She reached for his hand again, her fingers wrapping around his gently, as if afraid he might disappear if she held too tightly. You just moved, she said softly. I saw you. Her voice cracked slightly. You opened your eyes. Nothing. The stillness returned, heavy and convincing. Her heart began to sink. Because this was exactly what they would say, that she imagined it, that it wasn't real, that she didn't understand. And if she called them now, if they came and saw this unmoving, silent, they would dismiss her again. Worse this time, they would remove her, maybe even report her. She would lose everything, her job, her income, her mother's only hope of treatment, everything. Her grip tightened slightly. What do I do? She whispered. Because for the first time since this began, she didn't know. Not because she doubted what she saw, but because she didn't know how to prove it. And in a place like this, truth without proof meant nothing. Elsewhere in the hospital, the night was closing in, the hours before dawn, the quietest, the most dangerous, because decisions made in this silence often carried the greatest consequences. In a private room upstairs, Hawa Danjuma sat alone. The lights were dim, the air still. She stared at nothing in particular, her hands resting neatly in her lap. From the outside, she looked calm, unmoved, but inside, memories stirred. Musa's voice, his presence, the distance that had grown between them over the years, a marriage that had once been strong, built on ambition, partnership, shared dreams, and then slowly replaced by silence, work, power, separate lives under the same name. She exhaled slowly. Was this how it was meant to end? She murmured. No answer came, because some questions came too late. Back in the ICU, Bilqisu refused to step away. She couldn't. Not now. Not after what she had seen. She pulled a chair closer and sat beside the bed. Her body was exhausted, her mind overwhelmed. But she stayed, her hand still holding his, warm, always warm. She leaned slightly forward, her voice softer now. They don't believe me, she said quietly. They think I'm just imagining things. A faint, sad smile crossed her face. I'm used to that. Her eyes lowered briefly, then lifted again. But I'm not wrong, she added, not as a plea, but as a fact. Her fingers tightened gently around his hand. So if you can hear me, if you're still there. Her voice dropped to almost nothing. You have to help me. The words lingered, fragile, desperate. Because this time, it wasn't just about saving him. It was about proving something, that she mattered, that what she saw mattered, that people like her could be right. Minutes passed, or maybe longer. Time blurred again. The hospital outside continued its quiet rhythm, but inside this room, everything waited. Bilqisu's eyes grew heavy. Her body fought exhaustion. But she refused to sleep. Not now. Not when everything depended on this moment. Her head dipped slightly, then lifted again. Stay awake. Stay here. Stay with him. Her grip loosened for just a second, then tightened again. Don't leave, she whispered, though she wasn't sure who she was speaking to anymore, him or herself. Then it happened again. This time, stronger. His fingers tightened, not a twitch, not random. A response. Bilqisu gasped sharply, her eyes snapping wide open. No, she breathed, but she was already leaning forward, already searching. His hand moved, slow, weak, but intentional. Tears spilled down her face instantly. You're here, she whispered, her voice breaking. You're really here. Her entire body trembled with the realization. Because this could not be denied. Not anymore. Not by anyone. She stood up suddenly, her chair scraping softly against the floor. I have to call them, she said quickly, panic and urgency rising together. They have to see this. She turned toward the door, then stopped. Again, because the fear returned, stronger this time. If she called them, if they came, and he stopped again, if the movement disappeared, they would say the same things, dismiss her, punish her, erase everything. Her breathing became uneven again. What if it stops? She whispered. Her eyes darted back to him. Still, again. The movement gone, like it had never happened. Her chest tightened painfully. This was the problem. This was why no one believed her. Because it didn't stay. It didn't last long enough. It came, then disappeared, like a secret, like a truth that refused to be seen clearly. Her hands clenched tightly. I need something more, she whispered, because without it she had nothing, nothing they would accept. Her eyes moved to the machines again, the monitors, the lines, the data, something they trusted, something they believed, something that could prove what she saw. But she didn't understand it, didn't know how to use it. Her mind raced. Think. There had to be something she could do, something she could show. Then a memory surfaced, not from long ago, from earlier. Dr. Kelechi Okoye. He had seen something, not everything, but enough to question, enough to hesitate. Her heart began to beat faster again. He might listen, he might believe, he might help. But would he come? Would he risk it? Would he stand against the others? She didn't know, but she had no other choice. Her eyes returned to Musa one last time. You have to hold on, she whispered, just a little longer. Her voice trembled, but her decision was firm. Then she moved, quickly, quietly, toward the door. Because this time, she wasn't just hoping anymore, she was fighting. And she wasn't going to stop. The corridor outside the ICU felt longer than it had any right to be. Every step Bilqisu Sani took echoed louder than usual, her heartbeat thundering in her ears as she moved quickly but carefully down the dimly lit hallway. She didn't run. Running would draw attention, and attention was the last thing she needed. But urgency pulsed through her body, pushing her forward step after step toward the only person who might still listen, Dr. Kelechi Okoye. Her mind replayed the moment again and again, the movement, the grip, the unmistakable response. This time it had been stronger, clearer, impossible to deny, but proof was still fragile. And if it disappeared again, everything would collapse. She turned the corner sharply, nearly colliding with a passing nurse. Sorry, she muttered quickly, lowering her head and moving past without stopping. Her breath was uneven now, her chest tight, because every second she spent away from that room felt like a risk. What if something happened while she was gone? What if he needed her? What if no? She forced the thoughts down. Focus! She had to get Kelechi. She had to bring him back. Only then would anything she saw matter. At the far end of the corridor, a faint light spilled from an open office door. Bilqisu slowed slightly as she approached, her heart pounding harder now. What if he wasn't there? What if she was too late? She reached the door and hesitated for just a second, then knocked lightly. No response. Her fingers tightened. She knocked again. Still nothing. Her breath caught. No, she whispered. Panic surged again. She leaned forward, peering inside. Empty. Her chest dropped. Where was he? Her mind raced. Think. Where would he be? Then footsteps behind her. Bilqisu turned quickly, and there he was. Dr. Kelechi Okoye walking down the corridor, his expression focused, his steps measured. Relief flooded through her so fast it almost made her dizzy. Sir, she called out, her voice breaking slightly. Kelechi stopped, surprised. His eyes narrowed slightly as he recognized her. "You again?" he said, not unkindly but cautious. Bilqisu stepped toward him quickly. "Sir, please, you have to come," she said, her words tumbling over each other. He moved again. This time it was stronger. He held my hand. Kelechi's expression shifted, not fully convinced, but not dismissive either. "Slow down," he said, raising a hand slightly. "What exactly did you see?" he responded. She said, trying to steady her voice. "Not just a twitch." He squeezed my hand, and his eyes, they moved. Kelechi's gaze sharpened, because that was different. A reflex could be explained, a twitch dismissed, but coordinated movement, eye response. That was something else. Still, he hesitated, because stepping back into that room meant stepping into conflict, with authority, with decisions already made, with consequences. "You're certain?" he asked quietly. Bilqisu didn't hesitate. Yes, one word, but filled with everything she had: fear, hope, conviction. Kelechi studied her face for a moment, looking for doubt, for uncertainty, for anything that would make this easier to ignore. But he found none, only truth, or at least something that believed it was truth. His jaw tightened slightly. "Then show me," he said. Relief crashed through Bilqisu so hard her knees almost gave way. "Thank you, sir," she whispered. But they were already moving. The walk back felt even longer, every second stretched, every step filled with tension. Bilqisu's heart pounded harder with each passing moment, because now this was it. This was the moment everything would be proven or lost. They reached the ICU doors. Bilqisu pushed them open quickly, stepping aside to let Kelechi enter first. Her breath caught. Her eyes moved instantly to the bed, to Musa, still, unmoving. Her chest tightened painfully. No, 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 not again. Kelechi walked in slowly, his eyes moving between the monitors and the patient. Everything looked the same. The same. He stepped closer, checking the readings. Stable, controlled, unchanged. His expression hardened slightly. "This is what you called me for?" he asked quietly. Bilqisu's heart dropped. No, he moved. She insisted, stepping closer. "Just before I left, he held my hand." Kelechi glanced at her briefly, then back at the patient. Silence filled the room again, heavy, unforgiving. Bilqisu felt panic rising. "He did," she said again, her voice trembling now. "I know what I saw." Kelechi exhaled slowly. "I don't see any change," he replied. The words landed like a blow. Bilqisu shook her head quickly. "No, please. Wait, just wait." She stepped forward, reaching for Musa's hand again. Her fingers wrapped around his, warm, still warm. "You did it before," she whispered desperately. "Do it again. Please." Her voice broke completely now. Tears spilled freely. Because this was slipping away. Again. Kelechi watched her closely now, not with dismissal, but with something more complicated, concern and uncertainty, because her reaction, her desperation. It didn't feel false. It didn't feel imagined. It felt real, too real. He glanced back at the monitor again, then at Musa. Then he decided to wait just a moment longer. Seconds passed, nothing. Bilqisu's grip tightened slightly, her shoulders trembling. "Please," she whispered again, her voice barely there now. "Please." Silence. Stillness. The machines continued their quiet rhythm, unchanged, unmoved, unimpressed. Kelechi's expression began to settle again, back into logic, back into explanation, back into doubt. He opened his mouth, ready to speak, ready to end this. And then it happened. Subtle, but unmistakable. The monitor shifted, a small spike, irregular, unexpected. Kelechi froze. His eyes locked onto the screen. Then another shift. His breath caught slightly. "That?" he murmured. Bilqisu looked up instantly. "You see it?" she asked, her voice trembling. Kelechi didn't answer, because he was already stepping closer, already analyzing, already questioning everything he thought he knew. Then Musa's fingers moved, slow, weak, but deliberate, right inside Bilqisu's hand. Kelechi's eyes widened, just slightly, but enough. Enough to change everything. "Impossible," he whispered. But he was watching it happen right in front of him, no explanation. No dismissal, no escape. This was real. Bilqisu let out a broken sob, her body shaking with relief. "I told you," she cried softly. "I told you." Kelechi didn't respond, because his mind was already racing. If this was true, if this patient had been misdiagnosed, then everything was wrong. His jaw tightened. Decision, fast, immediate. "We need to run full diagnostics again," he said quickly. "Now." Bilqisu nodded rapidly, tears still falling. "Yes, yes, please." But even as hope surged, a shadow lingered. Because outside this room, power was still moving. Decisions had already been made, and not everyone would welcome this truth. Not everyone would allow it. Bilqisu's grip tightened on Musa's hand, because deep down she knew this fight was far from over. For a brief moment, hope felt real, not imagined, not fragile, but solid, anchored in something that could no longer be denied. Dr. Kelechi Okoye stood beside the bed, his eyes fixed on the monitor, then on Alhaji Musa Danjuma's hand, still resting weakly in Bilqisu Sani's grip. He had seen it, not a reflex, not a glitch, a response. And in medicine, that difference meant everything. "We don't have time," Kelechi said suddenly, his voice sharper now. "Help me." Bilqisu blinked, startled, but she didn't hesitate. "Yes, sir." Kelechi moved quickly to the control panel, adjusting settings, activating deeper monitoring functions. His hands were steady, but his mind raced. If Musa was showing signs of consciousness, even minimal, then the previous diagnosis of brain death was not just wrong, it was dangerous. Because brain death meant no legal protection, no obligation to continue life support, no urgency. And right now, they were preparing to turn everything off. "Stay with him," Kelechi instructed. Bilqisu nodded, her hand still wrapped around Musa's. "I'm here," she whispered softly. Kelechi pressed a call button on the wall, not the general line, a direct internal code. Within seconds, a voice responded. "Yes, doctor, I need immediate neurological reassessment in ICU 3, Kelechi said firmly. "Full panel. Now." There was a brief pause. "Doctor, that patient has already been." "I know what the report says," Kelechi interrupted. "This is a new request." Silence again. "Then I'll inform the team." The line cut. Kelechi exhaled slowly, but he knew this wouldn't be simple. Outside, the ICU word began to move again, faster this time, more urgent. Because when something final is suddenly questioned, it creates tension, disruption, and resistance. In the upper floor lounge, Kabir Danjuma was mid-conversation when his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. A message, short, direct. Reevaluation requested. ICU activity resumed. His expression didn't change immediately, but something in his eyes did. He stood up slowly. "What is this?" he muttered. The man on the other end of the call kept speaking, but Kabir was no longer listening. Re-evaluation. At this stage, impossible, unless something had gone wrong. His jaw tightened. Or worse, something had been found. He ended the call without another word, then moved. Fast. Back inside, the ICU tension was building. Kelechi moved between the monitors and the patient, double-checking everything, his mind refusing to settle. The data was inconsistent, unstable, not aligned with brain death, but also not fully consistent with recovery. It was in between, and that was the most dangerous place of all. Because in medicine, gray areas were often ignored in favor of certainty. and tonight's certainty had already been chosen. Bilqisu watched him closely, her heart still racing. "What happens now?" she asked softly. Kelechi didn't answer immediately, because the truth was, he didn't fully know. "If we're right," he said finally, "then everything changes." Bilqisu swallowed. "And if you're not?" she asked. Kelechi paused, then met her eyes. "Then I've just challenged the entire system. For nothing." The weight of that hung between them, heavy, real, but neither of them stepped back, because neither of them believed this was nothing. Footsteps approached, fast, confident. The ICU door opened sharply. Kabir Danjuma entered. His presence filled the room instantly, controlled, powerful, and not pleased. "What is going on here?" he demanded, his voice low but dangerous. Bilqisu instinctively stepped back, but Kelechi didn't. "We are conducting a reassessment," he replied calmly. Kabir's eyes moved from him to Bilqisu, to his father, still on the bed, still connected to machines, but now no longer just a body. "What reassessment?" Kabir asked sharply. "That case was already concluded." Kelechi held his ground. "There are new indications that require further evaluation." Kabir let out a short, humorless laugh. "New indications," he repeated, from who his gaze shifted again, this time landing fully on Bilqisu and staying there, longer than before, assessing, judging, dismissing. "This," he said quietly. "This is your source." Bilqisu felt her chest tighten, but she didn't look away. "Not this time." "Yes," she said softly. Kabir raised an eyebrow slightly. "You're risking protocol." Based on a cleaner's observation, Kelechi's voice cut in firm now. "I'm acting on what I've personally observed." Kabir turned back to him. "And what exactly have you observed?" Silence. Just for a second. Then, "Motor response," Kelechi said. "And irregular neurological activity?" Kabir's expression didn't change, but something colder settled into it. "Or," he said slowly, "you're seeing what you want to see." The words were quiet, but deliberate, strategic, because doubt was easier to spread than truth. Before Kelechi could respond, the door opened again. This time multiple doctors entered, including Professor Ibrahim Bello. His presence immediately shifted the balance. Authority had arrived, and with it, resistance. "I was informed there is confusion here," Bello said calmly, stepping into the room. His eyes moved briefly across the scene, then settled on Kelechi. "Explain." Kelechi didn't hesitate. "There are signs inconsistent with brain death," he said. "I've requested a full reassessment." Bello's expression remained composed, but his tone sharpened slightly. "On what basis?" Kelechi gestured toward the monitor and observed response. Bello glanced at the screen, then at Musa, then at Bilqisu. A flicker of recognition, then dismissal. "This again," he murmured. Bilqisu felt something inside her rise. Not fear, not this time. "No," she said. The word came out before she could stop it. The room fell silent. Every eye turned to her. Her heart pounded, but she didn't lower her gaze. "He moved," she said again, and he responded. Her voice trembled, but didn't break. Bello studied her for a moment, then turned back to Kelechi. "Are you basing medical judgment on this?" he asked. The implication was clear and dangerous. Kelechi's jaw tightened. "No," he said. "I'm basing it on what I've seen." A pause. Then Bello stepped closer to the bed, performed a quick check, precise, confident, then straightened. "There is no evidence here that contradicts the diagnosis," he said. "Final, controlled, and dismissive." Kabir exhaled quietly as if something had just been confirmed. But Kelechi didn't move, because he had seen it. He knew what he saw, and so did Bilqisu. Their eyes met briefly. A silent understanding passed between them. This wasn't just about medicine anymore. This was about truth. And who was allowed to define it? Outside, the first hint of dawn began to rise. Soft light touched the edges of the city. Time was running out. And inside that room, two realities stood face to face, one backed by authority, the other by courage. And only one of them would decide whether a man lived or was buried too soon. The first light of dawn slipped through the tall windows of Royal Crest Hospital, painting the ICU floor in pale gold. It should have felt like a new beginning, but inside that room, it felt like a deadline. Time had run out, or at least that was what everyone in power had already decided. Prepare for withdrawal. The words from Professor Ibrahim Bello settled into the air like a final judgment. No raised voice, no anger, just certainty. The kind of certainty that didn't ask for permission and didn't allow opposition. Beside him, Kabir Danjuma stood still, his expression unreadable. But his silence spoke clearly. Agreement, approval, completion. Everything was moving exactly as he needed. Except for one thing, one small inconvenient disruption. Standing on the other side of the bed, Bilqisu Sani, and beside her Dr. Kelechi Okoye. Kelechi didn't move when the order was given. His eyes remained fixed on the monitor. On the irregularities no one else wanted to acknowledge, his jaw tightened, because now this was no longer about uncertainty. This was a choice. Follow authority or follow truth. And those two paths were no longer the same. With respect, Sir Kelechi said, his voice steady but firm, we cannot proceed without further confirmation. The room went still, not loud, not dramatic, but heavy, because everyone understood what that meant. Challenge, direct, public, dangerous. Professor Bello turned slowly toward him. His expression remained calm, but his eyes sharp. You are out of line, Doctor, he said quietly. Kelechi held his ground. Then I will accept that, he replied. A murmur moved through the other staff in the room, because no one spoke to Bello like that. Not here, not openly. Kabir's gaze shifted between them, interest, flickering now. This was no longer routine. This was conflict. And conflict revealed things. Bilqisu stood frozen for a moment, her heart pounding violently. Because this was bigger than anything she had imagined. This wasn't just about being ignored anymore. This was about someone risking everything because of what she had seen, because of what she believed. Her chest tightened. Fear returned stronger, because now the consequences weren't just hers. Professor Bello exhaled slowly, then stepped closer. His presence alone carried pressure, years of authority, reputation, control. You are allowing doubt to cloud your judgment, he said calmly. This case has already been concluded through proper channels. Kelechi didn't step back. Then the channels were wrong, he replied. The words landed hard, sharp, unavoidable. Kabir's eyes narrowed slightly, because now this had crossed a line, and lines like that had consequences. You are risking your career, Bello said quietly. I am protecting a life, Kelechi answered. Silence. Thick, uncomfortable, because both statements were true, and only one could win. Kabir stepped forward slowly. Enough. This had gone far enough. We are not delaying this any further. He said, his voice calm but final. His gaze moved to the staff. Proceed. The word carried weight, authority, ownership, and behind it power, real power, not medical, not ethical, but institutional. The kind that decided outcomes regardless of truth. Bilqisu felt her breath catch. No, she whispered, barely audible but real. Her eyes moved desperately to Kelechi, then to Musa, then back again. This was it. If they moved forward now, everything would end, not because it had to, but because they chose it. Her hands trembled, her chest tight, her voice caught somewhere between fear and desperation. "He's alive," she said. No one moved, no one responded, because to them, those words meant nothing. Kelechi stepped forward suddenly. "No," he said, louder this time, clear, firm. "Stop." The room froze again, because this was no longer subtle. This was direct opposition to authority, to order, to power. Kabir turned toward him slowly. "You don't have that authority," he said. Kelechi met his gaze. "No," he replied, "but I have responsibility." Kabir's expression hardened. "Not anymore," he said quietly. The threat was clear, immediate, professional, final. Behind them, a nurse hesitated near the machine controls, caught between instruction and conflict, between protocol and doubt, because now everyone had seen it, the hesitation, the tension, the uncertainty that had entered the room. And once doubt entered, it didn't leave easily. Bilqisu's mind raced. Think. There had to be something more, something undeniable, because words weren't enough. Belief wasn't enough. Even visible movement wasn't enough. Her eyes moved rapidly, then stopped. On the monitor, the one thing they trusted, the one thing they believed. If that showed something, they couldn't ignore it. Her breath quickened. She stepped closer, not thinking anymore, just acting. "Kelechi," she whispered urgently. He glanced at her. She pointed. "There, watch it." Her voice shook, but her eyes didn't. They were locked on the screen, focused, certain. Kelechi followed her gaze and waited. Seconds passed. Nothing. The room held its breath. Then a shift, subtle but real. The rhythm broke just slightly, then again irregular, unpredictable, alive. Kelechi's eyes widened. "Look at that," he said sharply. One of the other doctors leaned in, frowning. "That's not artifact," he murmured. Professor Bello stepped forward immediately, his expression tightening for the first time. "Check it again," he ordered. Another spike, then another. Not consistent, but not random. Something was happening. Bilqisu's heart pounded wildly. "This is it," she whispered. "Now they see." Kabir's gaze moved to the monitor. His jaw tightened, because this was not supposed to happen, not now, not here, not when everything was already decided. "Fix the machine," he said quickly. "It's malfunctioning." But no one moved, because they knew this didn't look like malfunction. This looked like something else, something they couldn't easily explain. Kelechi stepped closer again, his voice sharp now. "We need to stop the withdrawal process immediately." The words hit like a command, not a suggestion, a demand. Professor Bello didn't respond immediately, because for the first time his certainty had cracked, just slightly, but enough. His eyes moved from the monitor to Musa, then to Bilqisu. And for the first time, he didn't dismiss her. He didn't ignore her. He didn't look past her. He saw her, because somehow the one person no one listened to had been right. The room stood at a breaking point, authority, power, truth, all colliding. And in the middle of it, a man who was supposed to be dead, but wasn't, not anymore. The nurse's hand hovered near the machine controls, waiting for one final instruction, one final decision. And this time, it wouldn't just decide a procedure. It would decide a life. No one gave the order, not immediately. For the first time since the case had begun, certainty no longer controlled the room. Silence did, heavy, breathing, unstable. Every person in the ICU stood still, eyes moving between the monitor, the motionless body on the bed, and each other, waiting for someone to decide what truth looked like now, because it had changed, and everyone knew it. The monitor pulsed again, irregular, unpredictable, alive. A faint shift in rhythm that no longer fit the clean final narrative of brain death. Dr. Kelechi Okoye stepped closer, his voice low but urgent. "Do not touch the machines," he said. The nurse froze instantly, her hand still hovering near the controls. Across the room, Professor Ibrahim Bello remained silent for a long moment. Too long. Because silence from a man like him meant something had broken. Not loudly, but internally. His certainty, his authority, his belief in the finality of what had already been declared. His eyes moved slowly back to Alhaji Musa Danjuma, still lying there, still appearing lifeless, but no longer beyond question. Then it happened, not on the monitor, not hidden in numbers, but in plain sight. Musa's chest moved, a fraction deeper than before, a breath that didn't fully belong to the machine, a shift so subtle but unmistakable. Bilqisu gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "No," she whispered, but her eyes were wide now, tears already forming, because she knew. Kelechi saw it too. His entire body stiffened. "That's spontaneous," he said under his breath, "not mechanical, not assisted, real." Across the room, one of the junior doctors stepped forward, disbelief written across his face. "That's not possible," he murmured, but even as he said it, he was watching it happen. Kabir Danjuma's expression changed, not dramatically, but enough for anyone paying attention to see the shift. Because control. The one thing he had been holding on to all night was slipping. He took a step forward. "This is a delay tactic," he said sharply, nothing more. But his voice wasn't as steady as before. Another breath, this time clearer, stronger. The ventilator continued its rhythm, but now it was no longer alone. Bilqisu moved without thinking. She stepped to Musa's side, her hand reaching for his again. "Sir," she whispered, her voice shaking, "you're here. You're still here." Her fingers wrapped around his, warm, alive. And then he responded, a faint squeeze, weak, but undeniable. Bilqisu broke. Tears streamed down her face as a small broken laugh escaped her. "You did it," she cried softly. "You came back." The room erupted into motion, not chaos, but urgency, real urgency, the kind that came when something impossible became real. Check vitals again. Run a full neurological scan. Get imaging ready now. Voices overlapped, orders collided. The system that had already decided an ending, now scrambling to reverse itself. Kelechi moved quickly, his hands steady, but his eyes alive with something new. "Maintain support," he instructed. "Do not reduce anything." The nurse nodded rapidly, for the first time following him. Professor Bello stood still for a moment longer, then finally stepped forward, not as the unquestioned authority, but as a man facing something he had not expected. His voice, when it came, was quieter. "Repeat all tests," he said. "No hesitation, no defense, just correction." Kabir took another step forward. "No," he said sharply. "You already confirmed enough," Bello cut in. The word wasn't loud, but it carried weight. Final, different from before, because now it wasn't about protecting a decision, it was about correcting a mistake. Kabir's jaw tightened, because for the first time he wasn't in control. Musa's eyelids flickered, small, weak, but real. Bilqisu's breath caught again. Her entire body leaned closer instinctively. "Yes, yes," she whispered, "stay with me. Stay with us." His eyes didn't fully open. Not yet. But they moved. Trying. Fighting. Returning. Kelechi stepped beside her, watching closely. "This is early consciousness response," he said quietly. Bilqisu looked at him, tears still falling. "He's waking up?" she asked. Kelechi nodded slightly. "Yes," one word. But it carried everything: hope, truth, victory. Across the room, the tension had shifted completely. Doctors moved with purpose now, not certainty, but urgency. Because now every second mattered, not to confirm death, but to protect life. Kabir stood still, watching, his mind racing, because everything he had prepared, every decision, every step, every plan was unraveling. right in front of him. And the worst part, he couldn't stop it. Not anymore. Hoa entered the room quietly. No one noticed her at first, because all eyes were on Musa, on the impossible moment unfolding. She stepped closer slowly, her gaze fixed on her husband, her expression unreadable. Then she saw it, the movement, the breath, the life. Her hand lifted slightly, unconsciously, as if reaching for something she had already let go. Musa, she whispered. The name barely left her lips, but it was enough to break something inside her, because this was not how she had expected this to end. Bilqisu didn't move from his side. She couldn't, wouldn't. Her hand still holding his, her presence steady, grounded, because somehow in all of this she had been the first to see him, the first to believe, the first to stay. The monitors stabilized, still irregular, still fragile, but no longer silent, no longer final. Kelechi stepped back slightly, his voice calm now. "He's not gone," he said. The words settled into the room, simple but powerful, because they erased everything that had come before. Professor Bello nodded once, slow, measured, then turned to the team. "Proceed with recovery protocol, not withdrawal. Recovery." And just like that, the ending changed. Not because the system allowed it, but because someone who wasn't supposed to matter, refused to accept it. Bilqisu leaned closer again, her voice soft through her tears. "You're not alone," she whispered. "Not anymore." And for the first time since the night began, life didn't feel fragile. It felt possible, because sometimes it doesn't take power to save a life. It takes someone who refuses to walk away. Morning did not arrive with celebration. It came quietly, like everything else that had changed inside Royal Crest Hospital that night. The city outside moved as it always did. Traffic grew louder, vendors opened their stalls, and Lagos returned to its restless rhythm. But inside the ICU, nothing was the same. Alhaji Musa Danjuma was still alive, not fully awake, not fully recovered, but alive. And that alone had already rewritten everything. The machines that had once been preparing to stop now worked to support. The staff who had once stepped back now moved with urgency. Doctors who had declared certainty now spoke in careful, measured tones, because the truth had shifted, and with it, responsibility. Dr. Kelechi Okoye stood at the foot of the bed, reviewing fresh scans and updated vitals. His face was serious, focused. But underneath that, there was something else, relief, not loud, not visible, but present. He glanced toward the side of the room, where Bilqisu Sani sat quietly, still, watching. Her hands resting gently in her lap now, but her eyes never leaving Musa. She hadn't moved much since everything changed, as if stepping away might undo it, as if leaving might allow the world to return to what it almost became. Kelechi walked toward her slowly. "You should rest," he said. Bilqisu shook her head softly. "I'm fine." Her voice was tired but steady. Kelechi studied her for a moment, then nodded, because he understood. This wasn't something she could walk away from. Not yet. Across the room, Hawa Danjuma stood beside her husband, closer than she had been in years. Her fingers hovered near his hand. Then slowly, gently, she touched it, for the first time in a long time. Her expression remained composed, but her eyes held something new, something that hadn't been there before, regret. Behind her, Kabir Danjuma stood still, watching everything, silent, his usual control gone. Because no amount of planning could prepare him for this, for his father to return after everything had already been decided, after everything had already begun to move. His jaw tightened slightly. Not from anger, not entirely, but from something deeper, something harder to face. Because now he had to stand in the presence of a man he had already replaced, a man who might now see everything. Later that afternoon, Musa's condition stabilized further. The doctors confirmed it, carefully, professionally, but clearly. He is regaining neurological response, Kelechi explained to the family. It will take time. Recovery will not be immediate, but he is here. 3 simple words, but they carried weight, because they erased the word that had come before, gone. Bilqisu stood near the doorway as the discussion continued, not part of it, not included, but no longer invisible, because even if no one said it out loud, everyone knew. She had seen it first. She had stayed. She had refused to walk away. Hours later, as the hospital quieted again, Musa's eyes finally opened, slowly, weakly, but fully. The room held its breath. Hoa stepped forward immediately. "Musa," she said softly. His gaze moved, unfocused at first. Then slowly it settled. On her, on the room, on the unfamiliar weight of returning. His lips parted slightly. No words came, not yet. But awareness was there, real, present. Kelechi stepped closer, checking his response. "Can you hear me, sir?" he asked gently. A slight movement, a blink. Enough. Enough to confirm everything. Then Musa's eyes shifted again, searching, confused, trying to understand. And then they stopped, on someone standing just beyond the circle, still, quiet, uncertain. Bilqisu. Their eyes met. For a moment, time slowed again. But this time, it wasn't fear, or doubt, or urgency. It was recognition, not of who she was, but of something deeper, a presence, a voice, a memory he couldn't fully place but had felt, somewhere between silence and darkness. Bilqisu froze, her breath caught, because she felt it too, that connection, unspoken, unexplained, but real. She stepped forward slightly, not fully, not boldly, but enough. Her voice barely a whisper. "You're okay." Musa's gaze didn't leave her, not immediately, as if something inside him was trying to hold on to that moment, that presence, that voice, that had stayed when everything else had let go. Days passed, recovery continued, slow, careful, but steady. And with it, truth began to surface. The hospital conducted an internal review, not public, not announced, but thorough, because what had happened could not be ignored, and the conclusion, though never fully spoken, was understood. A premature diagnosis, a failure to observe beyond protocol, a moment where certainty had come too quickly and nearly cost a life. Professor Ibrahim Bello stepped down from his position weeks later, officially for personal reasons. Unofficially, everyone knew. Kabir Danjuma lost more than he expected. Not power, not entirely, but control, because his father returned, and with him, accountability. Their conversations were not loud, not dramatic, but they were real, for the first time in years, and Bilqisu Sani, the girl no one saw, was no longer invisible. One afternoon she was called into a private office. She hesitated before entering, because rooms like that had never belonged to her. Inside, Musa sat behind a large desk, stronger now, still recovering, but fully present. He looked at her as she entered, not as a cleaner, not as background, but as someone who mattered. "Come in," he said gently. Bilqisu stepped forward slowly, her hands clasped tightly, her eyes lowered. I didn't mean to." "You stayed," Musa said. She stopped, looked up. He held her gaze. When no one else did, he added. Her throat tightened. She began. But she couldn't finish. Because there were no words for what she had done. Only action, only truth. Musa nodded slightly. That was enough. Silence followed. But this time it wasn't heavy. It wasn't uncertain. It was understood. Weeks later, Bilqisu stood outside a small clinic. New, clean, real. A place her mother could now receive proper treatment. Fully covered, fully supported. Not charity, not pity, but respect. And for the first time in her life, Bilqisu didn't feel invisible. She felt seen. Because sometimes the people the world ignores are the ones who see the truth first. And sometimes saving a life isn't about knowledge or power or authority. It's about staying when everyone else walks away. Some stories don't begin with power. They begin with silence, with someone small, unseen, unheard, choosing to act anyway. Bilqisu Sani was not a doctor. She had no title, no authority, no voice in a system built to ignore her. And yet she saw what others missed. She felt what others dismissed. And most importantly, she stayed when everyone else had already decided to leave. In our world today, we often trust titles more than truth. We believe expertise is always right, and that those with less status have less to offer. But this story reminds us of something deeper. Sometimes the greatest truths come from the quietest voices. Sometimes the difference between life and death is one person refusing to give up. How many times have we walked away too soon? How many times have we ignored something simply because of who it came from? Let this story stay with you. Let it challenge you. Because compassion is not measured by position, and courage is not defined by power. If this story touched your heart, tell us, where are you watching from and what time is it there right now? Have you ever been in a moment where no one believed you, but you were right? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so we can continue bringing you powerful stories that remind us what it truly means to be human. Because somewhere out there, there's another Bilqisu, and her story deserves to be heard.